Peoples too. Okay, so before, I promise this presentation is real boring. It's incredibly academic, so I'm giving everyone an opportunity to ask any questions before I do my presentation. Anyone have any questions about Buddhism? Oh, okay, all right, one taker.
Yeah, I'm pretty new also in it. I would say if somebody is starting out, what are the key doctrines at a high level? In plain English, how would you explain some of the key doctrines in Buddhism?
Okay, so the question is about the key doctrines in Buddhism. Last Sunday, I was actually asked by some of the high schoolers where they said, what does Buddhism mean to you? Which, very broad question, but after kind of understanding what they were asking, it was a good question. And I think it's important for everyone to have this answer for yourself, even if the answer is, I'm not sure yet, right? Which is okay. But if you have some kind of answer of what Buddhism is and what its relationship is to you, then it makes it alive, it makes it important to you, it makes it part of your life, and hopefully, helpful in some way. So for myself, Buddhism is at the very heart of it a path out of suffering, right? So that's the whole reason why the Buddha started down the path, was he had this anxiety about these terrible things that were inevitably going to happen to him, and he wanted to find this kind of way out of it, this peace of mind out of it. So that's, to me, what Buddhism is this path out of suffering, which you could put, in more of a positive way, is a path towards happiness or meaningfulness or, spiritual fulfillment, this path towards this settled mind and trusting heart away from that anxiety. And the way that we do it within Buddhism, and especially Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, is we recognize our flawed self, so in that deep mind, right? We recognize our flawed self, our imperfect self, and also at the same time recognize our impermanence and interconnectedness to everyone else. So in seeing that, we recognize that everyone else is also impermanent and are also imperfect, but at the same time, we are connected to them inextricably. And so if this path to end of suffering, if the path to happiness is linked to everybody else, then it is up to us, our responsibility, our purpose in this world to end our own suffering, to end the suffering of other beings as well. So that for me is Buddhism as kind of a very brief and high-level sort of understanding what the main tenet is, at least for my appreciation of it, is how I understand Buddhism. So good question. Hopefully that answered it. That was what I said when I answered the high school kids, right? A little bit? Do you remember?
So what are the key doctrines that drive all this, and what's the end goal?
The end goal is end of suffering. The key doctrines, it depends on who you talk to. So supposedly the Buddha taught so much that there's like libraries full of his teachings, and so kind of, depending on where you are in life, both physically, but then also, temporally or spiritually, things are going to make more sense, that are going to help you out of it. But ultimately, we're trying to find things that apply to our life that we can see it leads us in a skillful way away from suffering, and then towards more of a fulfillment in life. Anyone else? Sure.
It seems like some sects of Buddhism vary degrees of how much they incorporate meditation in their practice. The Jodo, is it stressed a lot? What role does just the act of daily meditating or meditating, is that something that's part of this sect or stressed as part of this sect?
Sure. Okay, so the question is, what role does meditation play, especially within Jodo Shinshu Buddhism? And so we sort of almost, famously don't meditate. Yeah, and it's not that you can't meditate or you should meditate or we tell you not to meditate, but rather that the understanding with Jodo Shinshu is that the purpose of meditation is very important. So if you believe that meditation is going to lead you to enlightenment, then essentially you're on a fool's errand. So we believe that that's not possible to get enlightenment through meditation in this time and age. So if you're doing that, then kind of useless. But there's nothing wrong with meditating in and of itself. Probably Shinran meditated. People have been meditating within Jodo Shinshu, and it's good to settle your mind, to kind of lessen your anxieties, to be in the moment. There's a lot of different ways that you can meditate, not just sitting quietly, but all these forms of meditation. If you're using them to affect your life in a positive way, in a skillful way, in a way that makes you suffer less and makes you happier, absolutely, you should be meditating. But if you're going towards enlightenment, then yeah, this is the wrong place for you. Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
Oh, yeah, could you just kind of clarify for me, like, what the role is behind these within prayer, within
Sure. Yeah. So the question is about the Nenju. So a lot of people grew up. I did too. Speaking, this was called the Juzu, but we call them Nenju now. So Onenju, and the characters, the Nen is to think on, and then Ju is another pronunciation for the character for Buddha. So to think on the Buddha. These originally started out kind of like rosaries as like ritual tools where you would use them to count how many times you would say something. So like in Jodoshu, they have these really long ones and they have lots of beads. And then each time you say the Nembutsu, right? Namanubs, namanubs, namanubs. You would count it and you would say it like 10,000, 50,000 times a day or something. But within our sect, it doesn't matter how many times you say it, right? So it became more of a symbol to be mindful of the teachings rather than an actual tool. But it being mindful, and it being a symbol, there is really no actual, I don't know, necessarily purpose, but it's not something that you like have to have or you need, but it's just something to help us remember the teaching, to be mindful, and to be mindful when we're doing any of the ritual things, which again is this almost this kind of aspect of meditation where you're trying to center your mind. So it helps us in that way, but other than that, it's not like it gives us, special powers or something. So. Yep. Dr. Ken? Okay. Yes, all right. So the question was, what is the modern role of chanting in Jodo Shinshu? So all forms of Buddhism chant. That's something that has existed since the time of the Buddha, or I guess rather right after he died, because the way that it was passed down was a oral tradition. And this is something that wasn't specific to Buddhism. A lot of traditions at the time were the same way. And so they would say the things that the Buddha had said that they remember. There's a very famous monk, Ananda, who had this like incredible memory. And so a lot of the sutras, they start out, this is what Ananda said, kind of thing. So, or not, that's not what it's Ananda said, this is what the Buddha said, sorry. So, there's this history of chanting the Buddha's words. Over time, it has become a part of the ritual for all forms of Buddhism. And just about every form of Buddhism chants in a language that they don't understand necessarily. So within Chinese, there is obviously the grammatical part of it, but there's also words within the Chinese that are just transliterations. And so if you were to read them, it wouldn't make any sense. Anyway, the same thing happens in Japanese, where in Japanese they read the Chinese translation of the Sanskrit. So they might recognize some of the characters and kind of get the gist. But again, like if you were to read it in Japanese, it wouldn't make any sense. So the same thing here, right? We read the English transliteration of the Chinese translation of the Sanskrit. So there's like these different layers of like we don't understand, and ultimately it's for us to kind of like meditate, right? Where we come, it settles our mind. We are, of course, reading or chanting the words of the Buddha to honor and respect the Buddha, to have kind of like an offering, but at the same time, it's for ourselves to try to like get all the other stuff out of our mind from our busy lives, and we have to focus in order to do that, right? So you have to read these things that you're not used to reading, and you're trying to match the tone, hopefully, of everybody else, and all these aspects are trying to get you to stop thinking about yourself and the things around you and what you're going to eat later, but to just be in that moment. So as far as I understand it, that's how we use chanting nowadays. Of course, afterwards, you're more than welcome to look at the translation, but it is kind of tricky if you don't have a teacher, because there's a lot of stuff that it's out of context. It doesn't make any sense, but yeah. Anything else? Crickets? Nope. All right. Audrey, did you have one? No. Okay. All right. Was that good, or do you want to hear my presentation? What? Presentation? No? Yes? Yeah. All right. Okay. Oh, one in the back? Question in the back? Or you want to hear the presentation? Okay. Oh, sorry. There, and then we'll go over here. Well, ideally, you would be applying the teachings to every aspect of your life. So we come here and we do stuff on Sunday, right? And that's good. It's good to make time to do that. But then when you leave, hopefully you're applying that to everything that you're doing in life, right? Buddhism doesn't stop when you walk out the temple. Like you should, ideally you should be saying Nembutsu like all the time at home and stuff. And I don't know how many people really do, which is fine. But the way of life of Buddhism is incorporating the teachings into basically anything that you do. So we do have these ritual things that we do specifically here and maybe a special place in your home, but taking the lessons that we have and putting it into whatever it is that you're doing is Buddhism, is living the Nembutsu. Okay, yes, over here.
It's going to sound like a dumb question, but it's not a dumb question.
No dumb questions, only dumb people. I'm just kidding. There's no dumb people.
Concepts of like ghosts and remaining spirits, are those just like souls that have continued to suffer? Like are those like souls that don't cross? Or like what is the Buddhist belief about like residual energy that stays behind? Like do Buddhists believe in ghosts?
All right, then we go to the presentation. But in all seriousness, that actually does kind of apply too. So I will answer your question, hopefully, with my presentation. Not specifically ghosts, but I don't know. I think it'd be cool to think if we lived in a world that ghosts exist, but I haven't seen any. I don't think I have the propensity. Anyway, all right. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Matt. All right, so today, all business, no pictures, black and white. That's the most color you're gonna see today. All right, question and response. So I asked my AI assistant what were the questions that people normally have about Buddhism, and so one of them was, what is karma? Karma is essentially the law of cause and effect, where karma refers to the law of cause, that's what I just said, where every action, whether physical, verbal, or mental, has consequences. So if you do something, something else happens, right? And it gets a little bit more into the weeds when we start talking about intention. So the intention behind the action is really important when it comes to karma, right? And so if you do something with good intentions, then hopefully it'll be better than with bad intentions. Now, this is not to say that bad things don't happen to good people or good things don't happen to bad people. Absolutely, that happens all the time. And if you have good intentions, it doesn't mean that you're going to get a good result. However, it is important that you do pay attention to your intentions because it's very helpful to have that mental process in the back of your mind so you're constantly working at it. Karma also isn't always immediate, right? So like if I yell at somebody, then they're gonna be sad and then I feel bad kind of thing is like, well, that's like an immediate like boom, boom, boom that happens. But karma does accumulate over time and sometimes it appears in other ways. So if we live our entire life, we're doing all these different things and we're not really sure when it will come back to sort of make fruition or to affect us. So the application of this is that the ultimate goal in Buddhism is to be free from birth, death, and rebirth, which is known as samsara. And so if we can have very good karma, then hopefully we can escape from the effects of it. So as long as there's karma, then you will be suffering. And so to get rid of suffering is to get rid of karma. Okay, so the next one wasn't necessarily a question that people have about Buddhism, but it's one important that we answer because there's an idea of, all right, if we all have karma, who is this karma happening to, right? Now, kind of in this the line of the ghosts, we don't believe in a permanent soul. So there is no eternal, unchanging self or soul within any individuals, right? So if you ask somebody, like, where's the soul? Point to it, like there's nothing there. What we actually consider the self is a collection of constantly changing and mental components known as the 5 aggregates. So this is a word that I never use, but an aggregate, I guess, is something formed by adding together several amounts of other things. So these different things come together and they make a self, and that's why they're called aggregates. So it's broken down into form, which is your physical body, sensation, the things you feel, perception, when you kind of perceive things, mental formations. So after you perceive it, then you have a mental formation about it, and then consciousness, and all that comes together, and it becomes an awareness. So of course, just like everything else in the world, aggregates are also impermanent and interdependent. So they depend on each other. It's kind of a chain. So if you can cut off one, then you can cut off like all the other ones. Or if you fix one, then you can fix all the other ones, I guess. Is that okay? Everyone's good? Okay. All right, so the application is that clinging to the idea of a permanent self leads to suffering. And from like kind of a psychological perspective, if you understand what cognitive dissonance is, where like something should be a certain way, but then it's not. We expect our lives to be a certain way because we have this idea of the time being a continuity from past to present to future, and that it all is like equally us. But it's a little bit different. So this gets into this idea of what is rebirth. Because within Pure Land Buddhism, rebirth is very important. So there's an important difference that rebirth is not reincarnation, right? Reincarnation implies that there is an eternal soul, that there's one thing that is me that jumps into the body of something else after I die. That is not to say that after you die, you just simply cease to exist, but rather there is something that gets reborn, and the Buddha never really said exactly what it was. It's like, yeah, there's rebirth. But it's like, what is it? You have to figure it out. So there's something that happens, and so it's important because our actions continue to affect ourselves and other people even after we pass away. So some metaphors to help illustrate this point is like an acorn to an oak tree. So an acorn, right, gets planted and then it turns into an oak tree. But if you were to look at an oak tree and say like, well, where's the acorn? You can't like point to one part of it. So it has been an acorn before. It is an oak tree after. They are inextricably linked. There is no one without the other, but they are not the same, obviously, right? Same thing with like firewood to ash. When you burn some firewood, it turns into ash. You can't turn the ash back into firewood. But it's the same thing, like there is no firewood without the ash. Another way of understanding it, especially through this like stream of consciousness, is an ever-changing river, where the river is constantly changing. Even if you're at one point, even if you looks the same, it's always changing. And so as we kind of die and something gets reborn, what it is still, when the river moves, it's still the river, but it's also different. And then finally, the weather today versus yesterday, which, as Sandy mentioned, yesterday it was real nice, it was sunny, and today like it's cloudy and kind of chilly. But even though it's different, it depends on one another, right? The weather today depends on the weather yesterday, and it only exists because of that. And so without that, then one doesn't exist. There's this kind of difference, but it's also the same. So I don't know. Hopefully that helps or makes it a little bit better. Anyway, but within Pure Land Buddhism, our concept of rebirth is centered around this aspiration to be reborn into the Pure Land. So this is a realm of bliss. That's why it's called pure. It's because it's free of all like kind of anything that would make you suffer. It's presided over by Amida Buddha, who vowed to create the Pure Land, as we mentioned the vows before in the deep mind, and then that way beings could be born more easily. So to be clear, this is not heaven. So Amida's Pure Land, it differs from the afterlife paradises of like other forms of religion because it's not a place that you go to be, enjoy, to be happy, but rather it's to train. So it's to train to become a Buddha, to eventually leave and go out and to save the other beings. So again, right, all of our happiness is connected, and so it's important for us to never, abandon the other beings, always going back to try to save them until everyone, the entire ocean of birth and death is exhausted. Okay, so going back to karma, unlike other views of rebirth, where everything is dependent on karma, Pure Land kind of gives you this like way out. So it's like if you have this like straight line you're supposed to go and you get to like shoot out. I think like the metaphor that's used within, who's it, Shandao? One of the teachings is that there's like a bamboo stalk and there's like an ant going through it, but it allows you to like shoot out the side and you fly forward or something like that. So it kind of just breaks the rules of karma essentially, because it allows you to be reborn by relying on Amida Buddha rather than your own efforts and karma. And then finally, Pure Land emphasizes this boundless compassion of Amida, which accepts all beings regardless of their past actions. So again, it doesn't matter what your past karma is, as long as you have faith and sincerely aspire to be born in the Pure Land, then that's all that matters. So again, this kind of shortcut through the path of Buddhism, which is easily accessible for people who, as mentioned again in the Deep Mind, that we're all imperfect, people who are incapable of achieving enlightenment on their own. This is the path that was given to beings like me and, I suppose all of us. So the application of this is, after learning all this, we have to decide for ourselves if this is something that applies to our lives, that'll make our lives better, right? Believing in an impermanent self, believing in the Pure Land, believing in all that stuff, we have to figure out if that's what's going to be what's best for us. Within the words of Shinran, he said, in the Record and Lament of Divergences, he said that, as for me, I simply accept and entrust myself to what my revered teacher told me, Honen, just say the Nembutsu and be saved by Amida. Nothing else is involved. I have no idea whether the Nembutsu is truly the seed for my being born in the Pure Land, or whether it is a karmic act for which I must fall into hell. Should I have been deceived by Master Honen and say, by Master Honen, and saying the Nembutsu were to fall into hell, then I would have no regrets. The reason is, if I could attain Buddhahood by endeavoring in other practices, but said the Nembutsu and so fell into hell, then I would feel regret at having been deceived. But I am incapable of any other practice, so hell is decidedly my abode, whatever I do. If Amida's primal vow is true, Shakyamuni's teaching cannot be false. If the Buddha's teaching is true, Shantao's commentaries cannot be false. If Shantao's commentaries are true, can Honen's then be lies? If Honen's words are true, then surely what I say cannot be empty. And he ends saying such, and the end is how this foolish person entrusts himself to the vow. Beyond this, whether you take up the Nembutsu or whether you abandon it is for each of you to determine. So Shinran for himself, he tried everything, and this was the only thing that he felt that he could do. And because this was the only thing he could do, he was willing to accept whatever happened after he passed away, right? After he died. If Honen was right, then great. If not, there was nothing I could do about it, right? It's this kind of sense of not necessarily giving up, but having faith in this path. And so kind of like jokingly, there was advice given to me, I forget, was it Socho Gui? But someone had said, like, yeah, when people will tell you, like from other traditions, be like, oh, you don't believe in this? Well, then you're going to hell. And you say, well, thank you. Like, thanks for your concern. This is the only thing I can do. And so if I end up there, I appreciate you telling me, but I can't do anything else. So all of us have to come to this realization of this understanding, if that's something that we think is going to be best for us. But ultimately, right, there's no way of knowing. Like, I couldn't tell you where we go after we die. I haven't been there, so I couldn't tell you. I can't tell you if someone else says, like, oh yeah, I'm going to go meet my husband in the Pure Land after I die. I can't say she's wrong, right? She's probably right. If you want to like kind of twist it or make it say like, okay, well, if after she dies, she becomes part of a stream of consciousness, which returns to Amida Buddha, which is the embodiment of wisdom and compassion, and so technically it's the truth. And it's like, right, whatever you need to do to like rationalize this for yourself. But ultimately, what matters is what we're doing in this life, right? So regardless of whatever happens to us after we die, we don't know. We should be practicing to the best of our ability to what we think is going to help us the most in this moment. And it shouldn't change what's going to happen before or after what we believe. Regardless, we should be doing the best that we can right now based on our capabilities. So that's what Shinran's trying to tell us with this letter, trying to understand from his own experiences, and then kind of explain to us that, like, regardless of what happens after, we're working on what we can right now. So that's my academic presentation. All right. I wasn't asking for your pity claps. It's fine. All right. Any last ones? Any last questions before we close? Quick one? Sure, one more. More ghosts?
Question, it says, so for tradition, it says, understanding fully the principle of causality, we shall not practice petitionary prayer or magic, nor shall we rely upon astrology or other superstitions. How does that pair if, like, you practice two things and one of them may or
Yeah, that's good. Reverend Yuki actually did a Dharma talk on this, which is pretty good. But he was talking about how, like, what was it? It was a comic with Amida Man, right? And how someone was relying on the horoscope to find a lover or something. And it's like, yeah, you have to wear red lipstick on this day, and then it'll be good. And so they did it, and then they didn't get their lover, and so they were very upset. So essentially, what it is that if you rely on other traditions, if you rely on superstitions, it's not like Amida Buddha is going to come down and like smite you or something, right? Rather, it's something that's going to happen in your own life, right? If you rely on it and it ends up failing you and you aren't happy about it, then that is something that you need to cut out of your life, right? If it's causing you unhappiness, if it's causing you suffering. If it's causing you something that's, really good for you, then by all means, continue doing it, right? If it gives you this peace of mind, if it gives you happiness, if it gives you the capability to be compassionate to other people, whatever it is, right? If it allows you to say the Nembutsu, if it allows you to be deep in your path within Buddhism, you should be doing it. But if it's something that is straying you from the path or causing you unhappiness or causing the people around you suffering, then that's something that you need to stop. So that's really more in line of what they're talking about in terms of like superstition. For petitionary prayer, you shouldn't ask Amida Buddha for stuff. Like, don't be like, oh, Amida, give me good grades. Amida, I need to hit the lottery. Like, Amida, let me hit the jackpot when I go to Sky River. But all of those things, if you ask Amida Buddha for it, you're not going to get it. Amida Buddha doesn't act like that. And so again, it's nothing that Amida Buddha Buddha doesn't care if you ask for stuff, but it's for the suffering for yourself, is that you're going to suffer if you ask for something and you end up not getting it. So again, that's something for yourself that you have to cut out of your life to work on your own efforts to let go of, how you want it to go, and that way your life will be with less suffering. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, that'll be the last one. I don't know if I said that question out loud. Anyway, so she was asking about petitionary prayer as superstition, if that wasn't clear from the context clues. Okay, if you please join me in Gasho for closing. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.